Just one more reminder to subscribe to the Spectator's YouTube channel. It's free. Then you'll never miss a new episode of Spectator TV because you always get reminded that there's one has just hit YouTube. And you can do so by subscribing. Hit the subscribe button in the bottom right corner of the screen. Now, in May, a black man called George Floyd was killed at the hands, or should I say knee, of American police. His death triggered months of protests, sometimes violent and destructive, many also peaceful, and gave renewed impetus to the Black Lives Matter movement. As ever, the UK imported the cultural wars of America. It wasn't long before statues here were being toppled and calls to defund the police were levied at the Met, though they didn't get very far in mainstream politics. Now, underlying much of these activists' worldview is so-called critical race theory. Now, you might be familiar with some of it already, that Western institutions are inherently racist, that white people are structurally privileged, that the British syllabus in schools and universities is colonized. It's a controversial theory. Many have criticized it. It's popular in many academic circles and among some activists. But is it right? Is it a theory of substance? Who better to ask than Trevor Phillips, former chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, one of the authors of the 2010 Equality Act. Trevor Phillips, thank you for joining us here on Spectator TV. Just mark my card. I mean, give us a better summary of critical race theory than the one I just gave.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for inviting me. And I wouldn't even dream of trying to better your summary. It was pretty damn good. I think the way that I look at it is this. As you will undoubtedly know, I'm pretty much a skeptic of critical race theory. And I'm a skeptic for this reason. If I were a white nationalist who wanted to discredit the progressive anti-racist movement, I would invent critical race theory. Why? Number one, it says to white people, you were born with original sin. And there is absolutely no way that you will ever shed that sin. So give up already. You are just racist. And basically, the only thing you can ever do, in one of the Bibles of critical race theory, Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, she says, the only thing people can do is be a bit less white, by which she means a bit less racist. Secondly, second reason I dislike it is that it's antithetical to scholarship. I mean, one of the key aspects of the texts of critical race theory is that it has to have no data. Data is an obsession with words, I think is the expression, are said to be characteristics of white supremacy. So actually, what critical race theory is based on is narrative, anecdote, what happened to me and my feelings. And actually, all of this adds up to two things. One is distraction from real issues, like pay gaps and so on. And secondly, an obsession with individual feelings, none of which will change a single thing for people of colour on either side of the Atlantic.
Let me unroll some of these things. But before I do, Trevor, one of the things that strikes me about particularly its depiction of whites, that they are just irredeemably racist, and there's not really much they can do about it except to the margins. It reminds me of Calvinistic predestination. It doesn't matter how you behave in this world, it's predestined whether you get into heaven or not. It doesn't really matter. And there's a bit of that about critical race theory.
Well, look, I mean, let's be clear. It's a scam. It is straightforwardly a scam. You only have to go back to reading Tom Wolfe's Mau-Mauing the Flag Catchers, in which he describes the way the Black Panthers essentially took down Leonard Bernstein and white New York society and played on their guilt in order to raise money for the Panthers. By the way, I'm full of admiration for their enterprise, but this has absolutely nothing to do with improving the situation for people of colour. And here is the other thing which I think is particularly pernicious. It makes the issues of race equality entirely about white people. It is entirely about what white people do, entirely about what white people feel. People like me simply become pawns or bystanders, who sit here begging you, Andrew, please be nicer to us. That's the real problem with critical race theory. It's great for the academics who sell books and can go around guilt-tripping white people, but for most people of colour, no difference whatsoever.
No, I take your point, because it does kind of, everything is benchmarked against white, and it doesn't deal with all the huge inequalities we see in Britain's ethnic communities, say between a kid from China, Anglo-Chinese parents, and a kid from Anglo-Bangladeshi parents. None of that seems to matter at all. One of the things, I mean, I'm not qualified to say whether it's right or wrong, but one of the things that depresses me about critical race theory is that it seems to pay no regard to the progress that has been made in a country like Britain. Now, we know we have still a long way to go, and there's a lot more we need to do for opportunities and deal with racism where it still exists, and no one can deny that it doesn't. But I was brought up in the 50s and 60s. You were brought up not that much later. We know how much this country has changed, and changed for the better. And it seems to me, if you say nothing's really changed, then you just kind of give up. Whereas if you think, actually, we've done quite well, we could have done better, we've done quite well, let's do better now, that's a message of hope.
Yeah, by the way, just if I can just make one point to you, Andrew, and also to your listeners. You began that question by slightly apologising for being white. You don't have to, mate. Honestly, it's cool. I'm chilled with it. Of course, you're never therefore going to be as handsome or as strong or run as fast as me, but that's your problem.
I've learned to live with that for quite a while now.
Yeah, you don't have to apologise for it. But I think your point is a very important one. And from the point of view of somebody like me, my family, I'm the 10th of 10 children. My parents and my oldest brother, my brothers, who were very active in the anti-racist movement in the 50s and 60s, it's kind of disrespectful to them. Every time I hear one of these people say, oh, nothing has changed, they literally have no idea. My brother ran home from school every day being chased by teddy boys. My eldest brother ended up in Wakefield prison for his anti-racist activities. So I think it's utterly disrespectful to our parents and our forebears to be going around saying, oh, nothing has changed. And by the way, this is another facet of the way that the whole Black Lives Matter movement has essentially been taken over by white people, because they feel it's okay to disrespect us. It's okay for them to go on Twitter and call me a coon, because that's Black Lives Matter gives them license to it. But there's another very important point which I think ought to be made here. The problem with a lot of the Black Lives Matter propaganda is it does not recognise that Britain is a very different place to the United States. And here is one extremely, I think, significant factor. In this country, they're getting on now for 1 million people who have both white and black parents or grandparents. That has not happened voluntarily anywhere in the world. South Africa has mixed race, Brazil has mixed race populations, the United States, but they're all out of coercion and slavery. This is the only country in which a population of that kind, of that size, has emerged since the war. And somehow saying to those people, actually, your mum is just a racist because of what she is, it's sickening.
No, intermarriage has been hasn't that been a great British success story?
Well, we can talk about the details of it, but the fact is it's a particular thing that's happened in Britain that we ought to recognise. We don't know, by the way, what this group of people are really going to emerge like and what they're going to be like. I don't know what it feels like to have two different heritages in my background. My children do, and I think that will make them very different people to me, but we don't yet quite know what that represents.
I would think it will probably make them 21st century.
I hope so.
That's the way it's going. I wonder if there isn't an even bigger agenda behind the not so much Black Lives Matter, but of this whole critical race theory, because it does seem almost to try to be aiming daggers at the very heart of our being and our existence and our history. So Britain, it will always be irredeemably bad because of the British Empire. It's just something you can never shake off, end of. And if you look at the New York Times, the 1619 Project, which was inspired by a lot of critical race theory, they picked 1619, a very important date. Many people did not know enough about it. It was the first slaves arrived in the United States. It is a critical date. It is the original sin of the United States. But it then goes on to argue that the purpose of the American Revolution in 1776 was not to free America from a colonial yoke and become an independent, self-governing country. It was because the slave owners were frightened that Britain was going to abolish slavery. So they had to break from the British to preserve slavery. Now, as someone who knows quite a lot about American history, I can tell you that's complete nonsense.
Yes,
Bar a couple of slave owners in the South who might have seen it that way. And actually, Britain's anti-slavery credentials were nowhere near strong enough in 1776 to be able to conclude that. But if you see what they've done, the very foundation of the United States is not built on freedom anymore or on becoming an independent country. It's built to preserve slavery. That goes to the very roots of the country.
Yes, and this relates to two points that I've made. One is the complete lack of scholarship. I mean, it's just, as you say, it's complete drivel. And actually, their understanding of the slave experience is utterly deficient. I mean, for example, one of the things that nobody really talks about is the fact that when we talk about slavery today in this country, and to some extent in the United States, what people are reflecting and thinking about is slavery in the Caribbean rather than the United States. Now, this is a rather kind of geeky point, but most American slavery was cotton and tobacco slavery, small farms, almost no American plant farms were huge, you know, like you see in Gone with the Wind with 1,000 slaves and so on. I think probably there are fewer than, out of 45,000, there are fewer than a few hundred that had more than 100 slaves. Whereas in the Caribbean, these were huge factories with thousands of slaves. So their understanding, and this is important because actually what is true about the United States, and I think the Black Lives Matter movement has missed a trick in this, is that the terror for African Americans occurred after the abolition of slavery. That is when the KKK emerged. That is when the lynchings happened. And what we're seeing now with the police is an inheritor of that rather than slavery. And I think they've just missed a trick, actually, because they haven't understood the story. But I guess more importantly than that, politically, we think of Black Lives Matter or we talk about it as though it's an inheritor of the Martin Luther King tradition. It isn't. We should think of Black Lives Matter much more like Extinction Rebellion, because a basic proposition is, like with Extinction Rebellion, you can't have a green world under capitalism. The BLM line is you cannot have an anti-racist society under capitalism. Never mind the fact that in Cuba there's still never been much of a black presence in the leadership after how many years a slave of socialism. Ditto, you know, my brother got beaten up in Moscow long before that was happening here. I mean, they're being used essentially as a front for people who want to overthrow things as they are. And in a way, that's one of the reasons that I slightly resent it, that actually these guys don't really care very much about whether black people are advanced or not. What they want is for us to be a battering ram for their desire to change society. I'm not against that, you know. I'm a lefty, but do it honestly. Don't use us as a pawn.
I certainly think it's true that Martin Luther King would not have been a supporter of critical race theory. I wonder, though, I just finish up on this point, slightly left field. I wonder if Malcolm X would have been a supporter of critical race theory.
Well, funnily enough, I reviewed a new biography.
There's a new biography out, a very interesting biography.
It's a really interesting biography. I think that Malcolm X would not have been a supporter of Black Lives Matter because he wouldn't have liked the indiscipline of the movement. I mean, he believed strongly in proper discipline. I think he would have seen some sort of commonalities with critical race theory in the middle part of his career, because his view was you couldn't trust whites and therefore we needed to be separate from them. And in that sense, the notion that, whites carry this original sin, he called people quote By Any Means Necessary all the time. They don't quote him saying whites are blue-eyed devils very much. He believed all of that. However, of course, after he had gone to Mecca, had Hajj, gone round with the Seven Hills with hundreds of thousands of people of all backgrounds, he wrote about this incredibly movingly. He dropped the whole idea that whites are intrinsically bad, you can't mix with them, all that kind of stuff. So I think at the end of his life, short life unfortunately, he would have been really pretty hostile to critical race theory, and also he would have recognized them for chances.
Yes, exactly. And I think it was a pity it was a short life, because he was an evolving person, and he had still so much more to contribute. Trevor, we could talk all day about this. It's been a joy to have you on SpectatorTV. Come back and see us again. It's always great to listen to you. Trevor Phillips there.